Hello, I'm Brigantia Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Welcome to our second installment of Romance in Modern Mythologies. If you missed the initial video, the purpose of this series is to take a look at our modern storytelling, look at particular themes and patterns of behavior and romantic dynamics that we see repeated over and over and over again that strongly resonate with our own personal life experience, what we've observed other people going through, and how that correlates with more ancient themes that we see in other mythologies. Now, the reason why we're not just skipping a step and looking at the ancient mythologies is because sometimes the romantic relationships that we see there are a bit hard to relate to. There's a lot more of arranged marriage, which obviously nowadays that simply is not a thing. And of course, cultural norms were different, relationship norms were different, just the very structure of society in these ancient tales is really very different than anything we experience or are even really able to relate to in modern times. However, the dynamics of relationships themselves, human emotion, what draws us to each other, what draws other people apart, what things work, what things don't, those do stay relatively the same. And what we're doing in the series is trying to look for these patterns and see what we can learn from them. It helps us understand ourselves. It helps us understand other people. It helps us understand the perception and our cultural ideals of what romantic love is, what it can be, and what it should not be. And that makes us better practitioners because romantic love and seeking out a partner, building a life with someone, that is so core to the very being of the human experience. It's not something that we can just ignore or dismiss as not being important or figments of people's imaginations. And of course, any tarot reader will tell you, you are going to have someone who's going to come to you and say, please deal out your cards. I've got this huge issue in my love life. I need some insight. I need some guidance. I need some help. So the more we study this sort of thing, the more we're able to be of service to other people. And besides, this is just fun to talk about. So there's just so many layers of benefit that we have. And if one of those things happens to be fun, well, that's just the way it goes, isn't it? So, the theme we are going to look into, we're going to look into the themes of antagonists who eventually become lovers, the idea of people who have very different social statuses outside of the story can still come together in the middle, and that equality is not determined really by, who's high and who's low as far as society goes, but it's determined by, are people evenly matched as a team? Do they have willpower? Do they have enough common values, common goals? Are they an equal match? Are they good sparring partners, in other words? And that's what we're going to take a look at because we've seen those things repeated in various fairy tales, various ancient mythologies, a lot of literature from previous centuries. It happens over and over and over again because this is what human beings do. Sometimes we do fall in love with unlikely people in unlikely circumstances and overcome unlikely odds. And it's good drama. So, let us examine Han Solo and Leia Organa. I just can't refer to her as a Skywalker, even though that would have been her proper family name. Just doesn't roll off the tongue. When we first meet Han and Leia, it's very antagonistic, let's put it that way. It's a very stressful situation, as a jailbreak naturally would be. They immediately have a power struggle about who's in charge, who's making the decisions, whose strategy are they following, and it's just kind of a big mess. They're just immediately, they cannot leave each other alone. And all through that movie, and they meet each other, really kind of in the bottom half of the film, you just do see this sense of, they can't ignore the other person because no one's really won the argument yet. And you also see there's just this they make such an immediate impression upon each other. One example you might have is when they were trying to escape the Death Star on the initial rescue. At one point they encounter some stormtroopers, and Han just starts yelling at the top of his lungs like a complete barbarian, and he and Chewbacca, essentially chase an entire company of stormtroopers down the hallway instead of the stormtroopers just, shooting back, which is what they would have done if they were actually trained properly. And she made her first observation about Han, is that, he certainly had courage, And you could tell that she admired that, even though very insane circumstances, probably not the wisest strategic move Han Solo ever made, but we could see immediately that she values courage. Later on, after the escape, they're in the Falcon, and Han and Luke are talking about Leia, because he and Leia have already had another little contretemps. And yeah, he's annoyed with her because she's insufficiently impressed with, his dashing rescue and, how impressive and amazing that was. And she's annoyed with him because, he's treating this very much as just kind of a game. He's not seeing the larger issues. And, he's flat out saying, I'm not in this for you. I'm just in this for the money, and I expect to be well paid. And she kind of got the last word. I'm like, oh, fine. If money's all you care about, then that's what you're going to get. And there's just something about the way she said that instantly you could tell he just felt that it was just such a hollow reward, just getting that money, that some part of him realizing that he is not really fulfilling his larger purpose, being a smuggler and having these wild and crazy adventures and pulling off all these stunts. He actually does need something more in his life, and he needs human connection. But he and Luke are now discussing her, and Luke inquires what Han thinks of her, and at first Han says, oh, I'm just trying not to think about her, she's just so annoying, I'm just so aggravated with the whole situation. But then when he saw that Luke was kind of glad about that, he got this really devilish grin, and he started talking about, well, yeah, she's just got all this spirit, it's kind of unlikely, but do you think a princess and a guy like me, and, Luke is poo-pooing the idea, but, Han is very amused. And in spite of, his flippant reaction and the fact that that exchange in large part was done just because it was very, very fun teasing Luke, at some level you do realize that he does admire her spirit. He's admiring her willpower. He's admiring just how unconquerable she was. Think about what Leia went through. She'd been on the run from the Imperials. She had plans to the Death Star. She was trying to get it back to the Rebellion so the Rebellion could actually do something about it. She's taken captive. She watches her home planet just completely destroyed right before her eyes. She's scheduled for execution, and she's still holding it together, legitimately holding it together, and essentially saying, now is not the time to grieve, now is the time to act, now is the time to solve these problems. She's in ruler mode, she's in leadership mode, and he just looks at her like she's one of the most magnificent people he's ever seen in his life. So they've both made a pretty profound psychological impact on each other. You come to Empire Strikes Back, and they are immediately at odds. He's trying to get away because there was an unfortunate incident with a bounty hunter, and she's annoyed with him because previously he had given her the impression that he was going to stay with the rebellion, and now she's mad that he's not going to do that after all. He's trying to get her to admit that she wants him to stay because of the way she feels about him. She doesn't take it the way he means at first and says, well, yes, of course, you're a great help. You're a natural leader. There's stuff for you to do. And he stops her, calls her out completely, and says, that's not it. And that is the moment where it defines that the core of their conflict is an emotional conflict. There is this deep-rooted attraction. There's a fascination with each other, and that fascination is rooted in some of their core characteristics that the other person really admires, and it hasn't been addressed. For Leia's part, it hasn't been acknowledged because she's not giving him the upper hand like that. She just is not going to do it. And his frustration with her is that he is wanting some level of emotional acknowledgement that what's going on between them is actually happening. And of course she's not prepared to go along with that because she's angry. Then you see them fighting in Luke's recovery room after he got tore up by one of the local monsters. And in the middle of their fight, just to piss him off and annoy him, she announces to Han that he doesn't know everything about women and goes and just lays a good old smoocheroo on Luke. I don't even think she really looks at Luke. She doesn't even really, I mean, it could have been anybody. It could have been anyone at all. The only thing that mattered is how much it would annoy Han, because she knew he was jealous, because she knew that Luke did have a crush on her, and because she knew it would make him mad, and that would, of course, even up the scales, and he would no longer have quite so much of an advantage for her, over her, in their current argument, argument 12,056. And we know this because as soon as the kiss with Luke is over with, she's looking at Han, just staring, and he's looking back at her. I mean, and just, the swords are drawn. It is battle station time. They both understand that Luke is not really a factor in this. Not really. He can put his hands behind his head, leaning back, and like, oh boy, look what just happened to me, yay! But Han and Leia have a greater degree of emotional maturity than Luke does, and they know that everything that just happened had to do with the problem between the two of them. Then we see the Empire attack Hoth. The base is falling. Leia is putting off to the very last second to get out of the command center. Han actually goes and fetches her. He is getting her out of that. She's saying, I don't know why you're still here. You have clearance to leave. Why don't you go? He's like, well, I'm going to leave. You bet I'm going to leave, but first I'm going to get you off to your ship. And so he's pulling her out of there. I mean, physically manhandling the woman as she's shouting orders out the door for the rest of the staff to, send the final evacuation code. Make sure you get to your transports. She's still in leadership mode, and he is absolutely in protector mode. There's the ceiling caves in because of the attack. He's shielding her from that. Then he sends a message to the general saying, you got to take off. I will get her out on the Falcon. He's assuming responsibility for her well-being. And all through the technical tribulations they have with the ship during this particular movie and everything, he's constantly focused on trying to keep her safe, trying to keep the Falcon together, trying to get some way to get away from the Imperials and get to a better situation. And then we have that lovely kiss, where they finally speak to each other on a semi-more real emotional level. And he gets her to admit that, she does like him. And more specifically, she likes him because he's a scoundrel, because he's someone she can't control. He's not her subordinate. He is not there to take commands from her. He's not there to take her crap. He is not there to be a little yes man. And on some level, even as annoyed as she gets with him, she respects him for it, and he understands that's part of the nature of the attraction. He is someone with whom she can deal with as an equal. She's not whatever rank she is within the rebellion. She's not Princess Leia. She's not a member of the Imperial Senate. She's not all of these things and all of these titles that keep her at a distance between herself and everyone else in her life. She's not on a pedestal. She's not an idol to be worshipped. She is simply herself, and that is part of what absolutely seduces her. And he knows it. So we have that lovely kiss that gets interrupted by 3PO, who has the worst timing in the history of all timing. Then we get to Cloud City, and we can see that, Han's patrolling the borders. He's not liking Lando flirting at her. When they have the misfortune of encountering Lord Vader over a dinner table, Han's first instinct is to pull out his blaster and try to shoot him, even though it doesn't work. And he probably didn't necessarily expect it to work, but it was just instinctive. There was a threat, he tried to eliminate that threat. Then they're getting interrogated, and even though he's really wounded and he's in really bad shape, he's still trying to hold it together. She's still trying to hold it together while comforting him. And you can tell by this point there's that mutual protectiveness is just completely out. There's no question about it. They know they are on each other's side. Which is why, when he gets to the point where Han is being frozen in carbonite, the last thing that Leia says to him is that, she loves him, she's confessing that. And I think one of the reasons why his response, I know, works so well, it's because it's intimating that we are going to hear him say it back. That's going to have to happen in the future, and because he didn't say it in that moment, then that means on some level he believes that there will be some kind of unknown, unseen way out of this. and that the last thing he was able to do was to tell Chewie, who had essentially been his personal bodyguard, to look after her and take care of her because he wasn't going to be able to do that for whatever period of time. And Leia's face as she sees him frozen, the horror, the anguish, and then the rage. The absolute controlled rage. You don't know what she's going to do ultimately. You don't know what plan she's formulating, but you know that someone is going to have to pay for what just transpired. Then we get to Return of the Jedi, and one of the first things we see is that Leia and the rest of the gang, they have all orchestrated this scheme in order to get Han unfrozen from the carbonite, get him out of the clutches of Jabba the Hutt. And it's all about him. She has to get him out. She has to get him back. When he is taken out of that carbonite and he still has the blindness from it, he's asking who she is because she's wearing this helmet that disguises her voice. And that's when she takes off the helmet. We see the big reveal. It's Leia, and she says, "Someone who loves you." And he says her name, and there's kissing, and then they get separated again because once again, Han is taken captive, and then Leia is taken captive, forced into that metal bikini thing, which I'm sure made a certain generation of men very, very happy, but that's a side point. But again, you can see that there's still a contingency at play. They knew that this is one of the possibilities. So even though Han is at this point not able to actively contribute, we see Leia taking a very active role of, I'm going to protect what's mine, I'm going to defend what's mine, we are going to figure out some way out of this because I want him back. After we get away from that situation, we see that, the next big thing between the two of them is at that mission briefing, and it's revealed that Han has undertaken this particular mission to take out a shield generator. You see her face that, when this is coming as a surprise to her, she didn't know that he'd been involved in this, and he hadn't asked her to come along with him yet, and she's kind of annoyed. It's almost like, why didn't you tell me that? That's stuff I should know. Why am I hearing about it in the mission briefing? You should have told me first. But the moment passes, and she's all, count me in, and Luke comes in, and they all go off to Endor. And we keep seeing them. She gets captured by the Ewoks after having to run away from some troops. Han's worried about her. He doesn't know that Luke and Leia are siblings. Leia doesn't even know at this point that, Luke is her brother. And we see Han still kind of perceiving Luke, not so much as a threat exactly, but certainly as a rival, that he sees that it's not entirely beyond the realm of possibility that Luke might win Leia's heart in the end, which, if you look at it from Leia's perspective, is pretty ridiculous, because what more do you got to do to convince a fellow that you care than by busting him out of the carbonite and taking out a crime lord in the process? It just seems like commitment to me, but feelings are feelings. Feelings are delicate, and it does reveal that Han, the degree of his emotional vulnerability to Leia about what she chooses to do affects him on a very deep level. And in fact, we see later on, after that misunderstanding with the Ewoks is cleared up, Luke and Leia have a private conversation in which Luke reveals their family relationship. And it's a lot for Leia to take in, and she doesn't, immediately tell Han. All Han sees is that, Luke's gone off, and he saw Luke, kissing her on the forehead or the cheek or something. And Leia's all upset, and he's asking her what's wrong. She won't tell him, and he says, well, is it Luke that you need to be talking to? Is it, would he understand? And she's all, ah! The first time we really see her break down, her emotions are coming much closer to the surface. She's not able to handle this. And Han senses that, because he knows that ordinarily, she's been over higher fences than this. If something is bothering and troubling her this on such a deep level emotionally, and she's not ready to talk about it, he reverts back to the only thing he can do, which is, apologize for his reaction and offer her what comfort he can. Then, of course, we have the fighting together and, winning the war and all that good stuff. And then Han is tending Leia's wound, and he's looking up in the sky, and he's seeing, the debris from the Death Star that's just blown up. and he sees her having this really faraway look, and he's trying to reassure her, saying, I'm sure Luke wasn't on that. I'm sure he's okay. And she confirms, no, he wasn't. He's fine. I can feel it. That's when Han misinterprets that connection, and for good reason, because he didn't know. And he thought, oh no, I lost my girl. Much as I love her, I lost her for some odd reason. She loves Luke more than she loves me, and I've just got to give her up gracefully to make her happy because I love her, and that's what she do. And he's in the middle of being gentlemanly, which is such an odd fit for Han Solo to do the gentlemanly thing when we know his instincts are a bit more rough and tumble. And that's when Leia finally fills him in on the picture that no, Luke is her brother, everything is fine. She loves him because he's her family, and she loves Han because he's her guy. And they kiss, and you see that's when they're beginning that they're going to be pairing off, and that everything is essentially going to be fine. Even though we find out that they had problems along the way in their relationship, once The Force Awakens comes out, they weren't together at that point. But even so, there was still love between them. No matter what, that love still remained, even if they really sucked at working out some of their problems. There's a lot to be gleaned from this particular pairing, and it works on a lot of different levels. Because sometimes romantic tension between people, when it's not acknowledged or when they're not psychologically ready or in a position to acknowledge it for whatever reason, it can take the form of bickering, of conflict, of, if not being at each other's throats, it's just constant tension and not being able to leave each other alone. And that's recognizable, and we understand that. So much so that when we see people in real life starting to have that dynamic, a lot of people are just like, how much you want to bet that's going to end up in a little bit of a tumble? How long do you think it'll take before they get from this point to where they realize that the nature of their tension is not what they're actually arguing about? And it's good to have this kind of insight into the human psyche. It's good to understand that just because people are seemingly at odds, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are enemies or that there are irreconcilable differences or that they don't care about one another. It just means that there are unresolved issues that need to be addressed. And another thing that I'd like to tie back into is the idea of people of very unequal statuses coming together as equals in the end. We'll see this in a lot of the fairy tales. You'll have a commoner and royalty somehow pairing up. In these medieval circumstances, which is not something that would have been an everyday occurrence, to say the least. But what brings these people together and what enables them to stay together is that their sense of being equal between each other has nothing to do with their titles or how other people perceive them. It's about character. It's about how they flow together. It's about their dynamic. They are equals in status because they are equals in mind. And isn't that one of the more important things when it comes to, especially when we're talking about long-term romantic partnerships, marriage, building families, going the long haul and actually building a life with someone? It's not a good deal when people are unevenly matched. There needs to be some kind of level playing field of, there needs to be some kind of mutual understanding of, we are in sync in this way. And it doesn't matter how everyone else perceives us, it's about how we perceive each other, and because I know what you are capable of. You are more than just your title in life. You are more than your reputation. You are more than how other people think of it. And having that detachment from the opinions of others is absolutely core and essential to a successful romantic relationship. Because if it's about outer perceptions, it's going to end. At some point, that is going to crumble, it's going to buckle under the pressure, and it will dissolve into nothingness. But if a relationship is forged on terms where it really is being fascinated with each other, having a genuine admiration for qualities, even sometimes very irritating qualities, but to have an actual admiration for the character of the person, that is going to go the distance and last a lot longer than anything that's more fragile or dependent upon having the same perceived social status in society, being equals, having the same level of education, having the same interest or anything of that kind. There has to be something core that actually brings people together, that is not dependent upon external factors. And I think that's one of the big takeaways from this pairing and from other pairings like it. Now, thank you for indulging me. I was raised on Star Wars. It is still my favorite story, despite rather dubious choices made in recent years. And it's something that I continually find meaning in and that I resonate with, just because the dynamics of the people, in spite of the extraordinary circumstances of the story, are just very recognizable. I can see it. And it's also relevant for a pairing that does not work, that I would like to discuss in the next week's video. I was actually going to tackle this perspective pairing this week, but as I was making my notes and making preparations, I realized that was going to be longer, more involved, and that I needed a little bit more time to gather my thoughts and create an outline. So, imagine this, if you will. Imagine Star Wars if Luke Skywalker had not been Princess Leia's brother, and he could have been someone who was legitimately making a play to win her heart, steal her away from Han, and essentially be the endgame pairing. Imagine how that would change the dynamic of Star Wars. Imagine how that would affect the story. Imagine how that would affect the character arcs. Because in what we're going to be discussing next week, we essentially have a Luke Skywalker-esque character getting the girl, and it making absolutely no narrative sense, no sense from a perspective of character development, and no sense from a mythological standpoint. Nothing about it resonates with human experience, because when you look at it, honestly, you're seeing something that just really wouldn't take place in day-to-day life. It lacks emotional honesty, it lacks truth, and it doesn't fit in with the common patterns of human behavior, and that's why it has been so controversial within the fan base. So, if you would care to guess what this pairing is, by all means, tell me in the comments below. I don't think I'll give away any more spoilers than that, only that I'm working very hard, and I'm going to try to present this argument for why this pairing doesn't work and why another pairing would have, and what other pairings would have at least have been plausible on some level, if not as satisfactory. So let me know who you think it might be in the comments below. I'll get into it next week. Thank you for staying with me through this entire video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.